you very much. And thank you everyone for joining us. I know Mondays can be a little bit crazy, so I really appreciate everybody taking time out of their schedule for this important topic. So if you could all humor me for just a minute, I'd like to ask you to close your eyes and picture someone with a sexually transmitted infection. What comes to mind when you think about this person? Have they had a high number of sexual partners? Do they look dirty or unkempt? Do you imagine this person as someone less worthy than yourself? Is this person your neighbor? Is it someone you would be friends with? Is this person a teacher or a principal at your child's school? Is this person someone with a family and a home? Does this person have an advanced degree from an Ivy League school? So now open your eyes. And my name is Anna, and I have two children. They're 16 and 14. I have a beautiful home in a pretty affluent area and a loving husband. I've worked in education for over 20 years as a teacher and an administrator, and now at the County Office of Education. I have a master's degree in education from Harvard, and I have a sexually transmitted infection. I have HPV. I'm going to be speaking about my experience with cancer caused by HPV, which began 8 years ago. In order to do that, I'm going to be talking about intimate parts of my body. And if someone had told me 8 years ago that I would be posting on Facebook and Instagram and speaking to strangers on Zoom about my cervix and my vagina, I would have laughed hysterically. If someone told me 8 years ago that I would be a speaker at both local and national events and the topic would be my cervix and my vagina, I would have just walked away at the ridiculousness. If someone told me 8 years ago that I would be diagnosed with any kind of cancer, especially cervical cancer, I would have said, absolutely not. I go to my pelvic exams every year. I'm all good. And if someone told me that 8 years ago, and 8 years after my diagnosis, I would still be living with HPV and cancer, I would have sobbed. And so here I am. And I'm mad and I'm exhausted. What HPV has done to my life and continues to do, taking away dreams of more children, forcing me to put my career on hold multiple times, robbing me of spending birthdays and Christmases with my family, affecting my ability to be intimate with my husband, demanding that I take multiple medications daily to feel just a semblance of normalcy with my bodily functions, is nothing less than enraging and mentally debilitating. I was diagnosed with stage 2 cervical adenocarcinoma in December of 2015. My cervical cancer, as all cervical cancers are, is caused by HPV. At the time of my diagnosis, I was a single mother to 2 young children who were 6 and 8. Cervical cancer is sometimes thought of as an easy cancer, but let me assure you that there is absolutely no such thing as an easy cancer. And even if there was, cervical cancer is not it. My treatment consisted of the removal of my fallopian tubes and the relocation of my ovaries out of the field of radiation to try to preserve their function. I then underwent 6 weeks of chemotherapy, 28 rounds of external radiation, and 3 rounds of internal radiation, where a radioactive ring and rods are inserted and placed directly around your cervix and left there for hours before being removed. It was excruciating and exhausting. I wasn't able to take care of myself or my children. We had to move back in with my parents, and I wasn't able to work. The chemo and radiation literally fried my ovaries despite the surgery meant to preserve them. And at 36, I went into menopause. I then had a radical hysterectomy, and the option of having more children was taken away from me. About 6 months after my treatment, I had to have reconstructive surgery on my bladder and ureters due to radiation damage, which was causing them to close up and put me into kidney failure. I had to take another leave of absence from my job for a full year. My abdomen is a roadmap of scars from the multiple surgeries that I have endured, and I live with daily side effects, both physical and mental, from my cervical cancer treatments. After my battle with cervical cancer, I thought I was done with HPV, but I was wrong. My body has never been able to fight off HPV, and it continues to be active in my system, and it continues to cause cancer-related problems for me. In 2017, I was diagnosed with precancerous lesions on my vaginal wall. I did 8 weeks of chemotherapy then. More side effects, more anxiety, and more fear ensued. The chemo worked, and those lesions were gone. And again, I thought I was done. And for 4 glorious years, I was cancer and lesion-free. In the cancer world, the magical number is 5. If you make it to 5 years with no recurrence, the possibility of having a recurrence goes down to almost nothing. My 5-year exam was in September of 2021, and I received the absolutely crushing news that I again had precancerous lesions. I went through 10 weeks of chemo this time, and it was awful. The stress and anxiety and pain that I had to deal with was horrible. I had to put my career on hold and take a 3rd leave of absence from work. After the treatment, I again found out that I was cancer-free, but it wasn't for long. I learned in December of this year that the precancerous lesions that I have been battling caused by HPV have now turned into stage 0 vaginal cancer. I'm completing another 12 weeks of chemotherapy. So if you're keeping track, this is the 4th time in 8 years that I've done chemotherapy. This latest diagnosis has almost wrecked me. The next step for me is a highly complicated and extremely invasive surgery, a surgery that could take away my ability to be intimate with my husband forever. But I still consider myself lucky. There's an obvious reason to consider myself lucky. I continue to be alive, but there are many other reasons as well. I'm lucky because my children will never have to face this disease. They have both received the HPV vaccination, which prevents cervical cancer, as well as 6 other types of cancer. And here's the thing about HPV. 80% of sexually active adults will contract HPV at some point in their lives. 80%. And you don't have to have intercourse to be exposed to or contract HPV. HPV is spread through intimate skin-to-skin contact. So if you are intimate or having sex or plan to have sex at some point in your life, you will most likely be exposed to HPV, which means that you are being exposed to a virus that could potentially cause cancer. Now, there are many myths out there about the HPV vaccine, and I'd like to address some of them here. The internet is a really scary place because, as you all well know, people can post whatever they want, whether it is based in research and science or not. Anytime that you hear about a crazy side effect of the HPV vaccine, I ask for you to please look to see if it's from a reputable site, such as the CDC. The first myth that I want to talk about is the myth that the HPV vaccination is not safe and that it's relatively new. The fact is that the HPV vaccine is safe and it doesn't contribute to any serious health issues. Like any vaccine or medicine, there may be mild reactions, the most common of which are pain or redness in the arm where the shot is given. Other typical side effects include a low-grade fever, headache, or feeling tired or muscle joint and pain, all of which are temporary. Rarely, an allergic reaction can occur, and individuals should not get the vaccine if they're allergic to any of the components, just as with any other vaccine. But crazy reports of people starting to walk backwards or dying immediately after receiving the vaccine are unfounded and based on pure anecdotes. Things like my sister's cousin's best friend's daughter. The vaccine itself has been researched for many years, including at least 10 years before it could even be tried in humans, and it is highly monitored by the Food and Drug Administration. Vaccinations in the United States have never been safer because of the stringent standards of the FDA. The HPV vaccine has been around longer than Facebook and the iPhone. And does anyone even remember a time before Facebook? Because I don't. The second myth that I want to talk about is that HPV is uncommon and it's unlikely that I'll be infected, so there's no need to get the vaccine. The fact is that the genital HPV infection is the most common sexually transmitted infection, and there are over 14 million new infections each year in the United States. It's so common that nearly every male and female will be infected with at least one type of HPV at some point in their lifetime. And currently, over 80 million Americans are infected. The third myth is that the HPV vaccine can lead to infertility. But the fact is that claims of HPV vaccine-related infertility due to premature ovarian failure are all anecdotal and not backed by research or clinical trials. A recent study of over 200,000 women found no association between the HPV vaccine and premature ovarian failure. In fact, the HPV can actually help protect fertility by preventing gynecologic cancers and problems related to the treatment of those cancers. It's possible that the treatment of cervical cancer can lead women to be unable to have children, such as in my case. It's also possible that the treatment for cervical precancer can put a woman at risk for problems with her cervix, which could cause preterm delivery or other complications during pregnancy. The final myth that I want to talk about is that only girls and women need to get the HPV vaccine. Men and boys don't need it. The fact is that HPV affects both men and women. It can cause genital warts, penile, anal, and oral and throat cancers in men. And it can be easily transmitted to a sex partner without either of the partners knowing. What I went through fuels the effortless decision that I made to get my children the HPV vaccine. The choice to vaccinate my children against HPV was completely uncomplicated and straightforward for me. Almost every person who is sexually active will become infected with HPV at some point in their lives if they do not receive the vaccination. Most men who get HPV never develop symptoms, and the infection usually goes away completely by itself. However, if HPV does not go away, it can cause genital warts or certain kinds of cancer. Someday, my sons will have partners. And someday they will be sexually active. I want to protect not only my sons, but their future partners as well. HPV, because it's spread through skin-to-skin contact, means that even if my son and his partner practice safe sex, there is a high likelihood that if not vaccinated, either one of them could contract and spread HPV. And while women can be screened during their pelvic exams for HPV, there is no test and no screening for men to see if they are carrying the HPV virus. And most men who carry HPV show no signs or symptoms of the virus, so they may never know that they have it. So my sons, if not vaccinated, could unknowingly be passing along this virus to their partners and could potentially be at risk for cancer themselves. Many people wish for a cure for cancer. People discuss and post thoughts and prayers for cures all the time. But we have a vaccination now that can prevent specific types of cancer from ever occurring. And isn't that better than a cure? If you could prevent your child from having to suffer, why would you ever make the choice not to? The risks for the HPV vaccination are negligible, especially when compared to the likelihood of contracting the virus and the horribleness of the actual cancer treatments. Choosing to vaccinate my children against HPV was a no-brainer. It is the absolute best gift that I can give to them. And I ask that you make an informed, science-based decision when vaccinating your sons and daughters against HPV. What's so incredible and unbelievable to me is that if the HPV vaccine had been available when I was 9, I would not have had to endure anything that I went through. I would not have gotten cancer at all, ever. If there were a vaccine for breast cancer, women everywhere would be lining up for it. And it should be the same for the HPV vaccine. And I'm here to tell you that any side effects that you may have from the HPV vaccine are far easier to tolerate than any cancer treatments. So please tell your parents, tell your friends, tell your siblings to get the HPV vaccine. I speak out now every chance that I get about HPV and cervical cancer. I speak out to spread awareness, and I speak out so that no one has to go through what I am going through. And I speak out for my friends, the women who have died from cervical cancer and the other 6 HPV-related cancers who can no longer speak for themselves. Thank you.
Well, Anna, thank you so much. It's so inspiring, and you're doing so much to help spread the word. We greatly appreciate it. So the story about HPV goes back a long ways, but the great breakthrough happened initially in the late 1970s, early 1980s. A researcher in Germany, Harald Zerhausen, found that when he was studying genital warts, he was looking at a different virus, herpes simplex virus, and he found that this other virus, the HPV virus, or 2 strains, were found in patients with not only genital warts, but also cervical cancer. And this led him to look at causality. And in fact, in all cases of cervical cancer, he was able to identify the HPV virus in its various forms. There were 2 that were most prominent, HPV 16 and 18, but then he identified several other forms of the virus as well. So this led us to give him the Nobel Prize in 2008, so recognizing a huge contribution to science. So with this finding, the question is, how can you create a vaccine that will be effective and safe for the population? And it was started by two investigators at Queensland University in Australia, who said, well, if we just take the viral capsid, that is the outer coat of the virus, a non-infectious particle, and create that as a vaccine, it should induce immune responses that are similar to the intact virus. So they did that as a concept, and in fact, they couldn't get very good immunity, but 2 investigators at the National Cancer Institute subsequently took that idea, made modifications in this viral capsid protein, and created a highly immunogenic, that is a good immune response vaccine, which is what we now know as the HPV vaccine, the beginning of it. So that was first approved in 2006 as Gardasil. At that time, it was directed against 4 of the HPV types, but they continued to work. Some of the other types that are also causing cancer were included. And a vaccine in 2017 was approved, which covers all 9 types of cancer causing HPV, or not all, but 9 types. So that's now called Gardasil 9, and it's the only vaccine that is approved for use in the United States. The Gardasil 4 and another vaccine made by GlaxoSmithKline are available for the rest of the world, and we're hoping that they'll be able to reduce the incidence of the more specific 14, 6, and 18 types around the world. So to date, over 150 million doses have been administered of Gardasil and Cervarix. This has been accompanied by monitoring by the FDA and CDC, as Anna has told you. They're very strict monitoring agencies. All responses that are considered adverse events are reported. And another agency looks at whether those adverse events are actually caused by the vaccine as opposed to just being coincidental. So the conclusion of all this, and we're talking about hundreds of millions of examinations, is that this is an incredibly safe vaccine. As you've heard, the responses are mild. They're usually at the site, or mild systemic symptoms. And I think there's probably not a safer vaccine in the world than HPV. So that's just a brief overview. I'm happy to answer any questions at the end of the talk.
Yeah, so I mean, some of my slides are a little kind of reiterative. We're going to be repeating and summarizing, but I think the moral of the story for the youngest population is that we want people to get the HPV vaccine when they have the best and strongest immune system they can possibly have in life. And sadly, it's not an easy thing to say, as I have one of my birthdays in my 50s coming up, but every year we get older, our immune system is slowly fading away. And we have the most robust immune systems at the youngest age. And so that's why we really do want to aim to get these vaccines when we're strong and healthy and can mount the best response possible. So when we think about HPV and thinking about the who, the what, and the where, I think Anna did a brilliant job kind of speaking to the story, and Dr. Mitchell, about how we even got the vaccine made in the first place. It's pretty remarkable. But just to sort of reiterate it, the HPV virus also causes warts and causes cancer. And our new vaccine, the one that we have available since 2017, covers many genital warts and the cancer-causing viruses. So it's actually a really delightful vaccine because nobody wants warts or cancer. And sometimes as we're talking to our teenagers, the idea of a wart is the one that really gets them excited and engaged with getting a vaccine versus the idea of cancer, because teenagers don't think about cancer or think that they can get cancer. So a lot of times thinking about the here and now and what's right in front of you can be a really great encouraging modality to help people get their vaccines. And we do know that over 90% of all of these cancers that are related to HPV can be prevented with the vaccine. So that's a pretty huge number. It's hard to beat that. And again, when you're thinking about talking to teens and young people, over 90% is an A, and everybody wants an A. So there you go. We're not talking a B minus. This is a good grade. And as I was alluding to, the HPV type 6 and 11 cause warts, whereas 16 and 18 cause cancer. So those are the most common HPV viruses we see in these arenas. And as Dr. Mitchell said, there's definitely other HPV subtypes that cause cancer. And those are also included in our 9 HPV type containing vaccine. And again, as Anna said, most people who have sex or intimate relations of any kind will get an HPV infection at some point in their life. It's just a human thing because we touch each other. It's not dirty. It's not, forbidden. It's not taboo. It just is. Most of us get some type at some point in our life. We don't know we have it because it's usually no symptoms. It's just kind of there and we clear it and it goes away over 1 to 2 to 3 years. But think about all the touch that can happen in those 1 to 3 years when we don't ever know we have it. And this is one of my favorite slides. One of my older mentors and colleagues used to really teach us about HPV, that it's basically like glitter. And if any of you have done any glitter projects, it gets everywhere and sticks to you and you can't get it off of you. Glitter is like a mess. And when you try to open up glitter with your kids, you know what you're getting yourself into. It's everywhere and you're going to find it for days to come. And that's HPV. It's spread from one person to another by skin-to-skin contact. We don't always put glitter in our genital area, but that's a very common space for HPV. And again, it can happen just through touching. And there's no intercourse needed. And you obviously can get HPV from someone who doesn't know that they have it. So it's not like they're giving it to you with malicious intent. They're just being intimate, and they have probably been intimate before and have it from that experience. And so it doesn't matter what partner you're with, what gender you're with, 1 or 2 or 3, it just can be partnered to partner passage. So the HPV virus causes cancer. And as I was talking to at the beginning about our immune system, so our immune system fights these infections and clears them usually within a couple years. The problem, though, is some of these HPV infections can't get cleared. Our immune system's not doing their job. And so this persistent longer infection with a high risk type can evolve into cancer. And this happens over time. And that's why we see cervical cancer screening, traditionally the pap smear and HPV screening, can pick these up before it can turn into cancer for some people. So there's great screening for cervical cancer, but there are not a lot of screening tests for these other types of HPV cancers that, like Anna was talking about, the oral cancers, esophageal cancers. We don't do routine screening of men for HPV-related cancers. And a lot of times HPV is not detected until there's a very, very significant health problem. So what we want to do is we want to prevent HPV. We want our young people to get the vaccine. We want them to get the vaccine that would lead to all these types of cancers, prevent genital warts. Don't even want them to get abnormal cells that would lead them to have recurrent pap smears and colposcopies. If you do have a pap smear when you're 21 and over time that pap smear is abnormal, you're having a lot of testing and exams and biopsies and follow-up, and you're missing work and you're uncomfortable and you're spotting and you're bleeding. So there's even more to it than cancer, which is obviously something you absolutely want to prevent. But we also want to prevent sort of miserable experiences for women or people who have cervices, and HPV vaccine can prevent that. And that's also important when we think about providing healthcare and access and reaching all of our patients. is that this valuable vaccine can actually improve access by reducing the need for these repeat biopsies and visits and allow more people to get screened. So the ramifications are huge. And the idea is to get this vaccine when the immune system is strong and get it in the child before they're ever exposed to HPV. So they see this new antigen capsid and they develop their robust, crazy immune response, and they keep that with them through their life. And so the guidelines are now to recommend vaccine at age 11 or 12, and that's really put forth by vaccine recommenders because that's when a lot of the kids get their vaccine. So it's already like normative to get a vaccine at age 11 or 12, so just get your HPV too. But it can be started at age 9, and a lot of pediatricians and a lot of conversations and dialogues and counseling is starting to be approached at that age because the earlier the better. Let's get these 2 shots and get it done. So you don't have to wait till you're 11 or 12. This is all genders. You can get it at age 9. You don't have to be just the girl. The vaccine has also now been approved for everyone through age 26. The idea is that still, let's get the vaccine if you haven't gotten it yet, because your immune system is still robust. And I really like this idea of through age 26, because there are a lot of patients whose parents don't support vaccines. And so they need to be a little older. So once they're out of their kind of mom's pediatric or dad's pediatric reign, they can make these choices to get the vaccine themselves. And they do tend to have healthcare coverage through their parents in California through the age 26. So, well, not through age 26, up until age 26. So it's something to think about. And that's a very common conversation and discussion for us who take care of adolescents is what do we do when there's a parent and teen difference in opinion, and how do we navigate those conversations? And I'm a huge fan and advocate and champion for empowering my patients, the teen, to speak for themselves and champion themselves and get these HPV vaccines to prevent cancer. I wish Anna could just come to my clinic with me every day and talk to all the parents, and I think it would be a win. And it is also very nice to think that one little silver lining of COVID, I don't want to be crazy and say COVID has a silver lining, but it has opened this discussion and dialogue about vaccines and the benefits and the importance and the safety and the testing. And I mean, it's just like this floodgate of vaccination information has been available now. And so a lot of people are seemingly much more receptive, in my anecdotal experience, to get this vaccine because they understand that there's significance and it can be life-changing. Right now, it's not recommended for everyone who's over age 26 who didn't get the vaccine. You know, some of this is really related to kind of access and availability, cost effectiveness. And we don't know if we know it's not as effective because your immune system is not as robust. And the other part is you may have already been exposed to HPV virus, that then the vaccine, our little nanoviolent, the 9-valent vaccine may not cover that HPV strain. So we do have some limitations and knowledge of, you know, what age to get it. Maybe 27 through 30, 45 might be a wise decision for someone who hasn't had the vaccine if there are certain high-risk features. So those are more taken on an individual basis as patients discuss this with their clinicians. So in a nutshell, we can stop cervical cancer. Over 90% can be prevented with this vaccine. And I think we just have to keep having these conversations and feeling inspired by our colleagues and all these wonderful people who share their experiences. So it feels really good to be here because I know these are my like-minded people. We're all on the same page.